I'm good. These days I'm good. It's a lot going on out there in the world. But that's every day. But as a person, I'm good. For me, family first. They're my driving force to why I work so hard and do what I do. So I'm good. I'm blessed. I'm healthy. I got a roof over my head. I can eat. So, to me, I'm good. Life as a father is interesting for me. It's a daily challenge, but it's put a lot of things in perspective for me since becoming a dad. And at that point, you're responsible for helping raise and shape another human being that you want to grow up and make the right decisions and be a light in the world. So you kind of have to look back into who you are and how you grew up, and you try to pick and find things that um, you thought were positive and beneficial to you, and the things that you weren't, and you kind of just want to you always want to give your kid the life that you didn't have. Oh man, that's a lot. I feel like I've grown with everything, with patience, um, understanding, um, just being, more human. And as you're responsible, for another life, and you interact in the world, and you know what you mean to your family and to your kid, and you walk past people every day that they mean the same thing to their family and to their kids. So it puts you or it puts things in a pretty unique perspective, as to where when you're by yourself, sometimes it's easy to kind of um you can care about other people in that manner, but it's kind of like you're focused, and you're kind of in your own world, and it makes you a little bit more just empathetic, or at least me, to people and family. I think that being present for your kids is important, um, especially like when they look back, and when you look back. I've you don't really I didn't really have a crazy concept of time until I had a daughter, and then started to realize how fast the times go by, and how fast they grow. And then you kind of realize that you're also growing at that same pace, and your life has moved at that same pace. So it puts in perspective to try to appreciate things a lot more. They don't stay little forever, and you're the center of their world for a limited time until they become their own person, and then they start to develop their own center of their world. When I meet other parents, I really let it like sink in that they say enjoy it now, because it changes so quick. So it's really important for you to enjoy that time, even the difficult parts of it, getting up in the middle of the night and all types of different things you have to teach them. And, but I've actually learned to appreciate that, because I can already see myself missing some of the difficult times, getting up at 2 in the morning and having to like rock my daughter back to sleep. And now she's a toddler, and she doesn't want to be picked up and rocked back to sleep. It's I might go in and like rub her back, and in another couple years, she's not going to want me to come in there at all. So I mean, you get to be around the people that you love. It has its ups and its downs, because you live with people, you see them all the time. You have tips and things like that, and especially being a dad of a toddler, there's times where you're stressing yourself out. But to me, there's nothing better than coming home to your family, and that unconditional love. So I think that again, when you're working hard at something, it's when you have your motivation right in front of you every day, it makes it easy. It's like, it's kind of like just waking up and brushing your teeth. Like, I have to do these things. I have to take things to the highest levels that I can, not just for me anymore, but for my family. I grew up around a lot of music. My mom played the bass guitar. Ever since I could remember, I was into music. I have a identical twin brother. I think when we were like probably like 5 or 6, he got like a little guitar. I got like a pair of congas, and I had older brothers that listened to a lot of hip hop. And ironically, I wasn't really allowed to listen to too much of it. I kind of had to sneak because I had one of those moms that kind of, wanted to filter a lot of like the negativity, especially, in the area that I grew up in Harlem. But it always found its way to me. I'll say that as far as listening to hip hop, and ever since I heard it, I loved it, but it was also just all around me. There's a process to every success that you might see on like an Instagram or a record that comes out. To everybody else, it seems like it kind of just falls into place. But the process to getting to the point of getting the songs out and the placements and things like that, it's weeks, months, years of work and networking. um, so yeah, the grind is always ongoing, but I also learn to appreciate the journey as I go. And I find like little milestones that I hit, whether it's particular artists that I work with that I've, grew up listening to, or um, you know, charting on a billboard and things like that. There's people that work in the music industry, and they go their whole career and they never get to do some of those things. So even if I'm not at where I envision myself, I still try to take time to appreciate where I'm at. I like to be able to be unpredictable. I think that as people, we find comfort in um, assumption and expectation, like what we want a person to be back. It just makes it easier for us to process. But people are different, and they're not always they don't always fit into the boxes that you have them in mentally. So I think that you can express that through music. And I think that at times it's even criticized a little bit, when people try to go back and forth between genres and they're like, oh, it doesn't like sound right, or it doesn't seem right, or why are they doing that? And they forget that, like, when you wake up, you're not just reserved to feel 1 to 2 emotions in a day. You go through a spectrum of different emotions in a day. And if you're creating, why can't you do the same thing? Why do you have to be confined to particular genres or emotion, but just because it's what people have seen or expect from you? Yeah, I think I deal with criticism pretty well. I think I know myself. I know my capabilities. So I never get to a point where I question myself based off anything someone else is gonna say to me. Any questions that I have about myself, they usually come from me. But I don't think I've never questioned if I was like, good enough to to make it in music. I always just question would I get the opportunity. And I think some people, they struggle when they don't see the opportunity, they question if they're good enough. And I think I've been able to progress in the ways that I have is because that was never even a thought or factor. It was just I need to put myself in a position to have the opportunity, not to be good enough, because I feel like I am. When I first started making beats, I wanted my beats to sound like my some of my favorite producers, and if they didn't sound to that standard, um, I'd question it. But as I started, I kind of immediately tuned my ear to say, I became a realist, and I'm that way in all facets of life. So I want to be a producer. If I'm making beats, and at least the quality is not of what I can hear on the radio or what I see being successful, I know I need more work. So I'm able to have that realization with myself, and I think that gives me the confidence because once you get to that point, you make yourself ready. So when you are presenting to, artists and things like that, it sounds like that and they hear it. And then you start to realize that, that's it's important to accomplish that with yourself first before you do with the artist, because there might be some artists that they might not they sometimes they don't like beats and things like that, and you have to be able to accept that criticism without saying that I'm not good enough, and you have to be able to redirect it and say that just wasn't what they were looking for. And I think that's the important part of being able to do that in cycles, and that's what keeps you going, and you don't really fall into that space to where you're questioning yourself. I get discouraged like a lot, but not in the sense that um I'm gonna quit, especially not now. Especially since becoming a dad, quitting has never even really crossed my mind. I get discouraged at some of the things that 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 pop up in the industry sometimes that's not music related or creative related. A lot of the politics and things like that. Um, but Yeah, I completely think that the best thing to do is to keep going forward. And it's again me living at home with my family. There's nothing more that I need for the motivation. I don't have to talk myself into um, having to like get up and push and work towards music and things like that. That's just secondary nature for me. I've kind of learned to separate and keep the creativity creative. That's why and how I started. I started making music because I loved it and I enjoyed it. And sometimes, you can get tainted by bad experiences with business and disappointment. But ultimately, if you really love it, you come back to like, I'm creating music that I love and other people love. And then you kind of learn to separate it. And you do have to be able to incorporate business if you have a particular level that you're trying to get to. So I think that is something that can be difficult for anybody as a creative, whether musically or anything else, just finding that line between like I love this and I would do it for free, but at what point do I, transition this into trying to, make a living off of it? I feel like it's expressions of sometimes the negativity that, people are in and forced to live in. So I understand it on all sides because I've grew up in rough and difficult neighborhoods, and a lot of it is just expressing daily life that some people can't escape, and then there's some people that can't escape it. So I wouldn't say that it's negative. I think that the interpretation and the ideas that can be planted can be negative for some listeners, but I think that depends more on the listener. And I think there's also a huge stigma that comes with hip hop that doesn't come necessarily with movies or not as much because we can say that movies are equally or can equally be as negative and influential to people, but hip hop seems to take the brunt force of the criticism when it comes to that. I leave it up to the listener, and I kind of view things through the scope of the way that I learned. Sometimes I don't know if that's like selfish because obviously everybody doesn't have the same thought process and mind as me. But I'm capable of listening to music that can express things that might sound like negative and not be influenced to go out and do what I'm hearing. So my expectation is that everybody should be able to listen to music in that capacity. Unfortunately, it's not always what happens, but I don't actually think that has to do with the music. I think that has to do more with the people, the environment, the upbringing, and the learning. Through sports, you find out who you are through trials, tribulations, injuries, adversity, pressure, expectations. I think all of those things help prepare me for, a journey in the music industry. And there's a lot of intangibles that come with being an athlete. If you want to be good, you have to put the work in. Nothing is really just given to you. You can have talent, but if you run into somebody that is equally as talented and they work harder than you, that's going to show. So those things kind of trained my mind and my belief in myself to be able to to move in the manner that I do when it comes to music. Basketball was easier because it just I was able to kind of like tune everybody out except for, like the people on the court. And then at that point you just do what you do. But I think to get to that point, it takes a lot of practice, a lot of repetition. And, at a point you start to realize that, you know, I'm doing what I do every day. I'm just doing it with people watching now, and it's in a different setting. And I think for me, when I was younger, that helped to take some of the pressure off. And I actually look forward to it because I think people discover who they are in pressure moments, like, and I think that even if you don't meet your standard, you learn about yourself, you learn why, and you learn about maybe like different insecurities you might have because you're worried about, like, what if I fail or how do I look? So I think all of those things are great teachers, and having to, perform under pressure is one of those things. You can place expectations on yourself, and you can also pile on the expectations of other people. But at the end of the day, um, what matters the most are the expectations that you have for yourself. And if that expectation is perfection, the to use the same analogy, a ball is always going to eventually roll off your foot at some point. It's what you do after that. And I think for that game, I think I handled the rest of the game well. I didn't like hang my head or anything like that. I was able to like to truck through and to play, and I did a pretty decent job for the rest of that game. But I think that's a lesson like that transitions into life. You get this big build up moment, and there's going to be times where you don't always have the outcome that you want or you expect or you envision in your mind. And it's what do you do after that, and who are you after that moment? I feel good. I like to be able to express, like I said, like the human side of people that are creatives. I think so often we're asked so much about um, our talents as far as like music, and that often is relatively a small part of who we are, outside of that. So, I think it's always good to be able to, give people some insight into who you are as a person. And I've realized that it helps people to connect with your music better at times as well. Um, there's a lot of artists that they have fans of who they are as a person, or at least um, who they see they are as a person sometimes first, and then the music comes second. I just want to tell people that there's a lot of goals and things like that you can have for yourself. I say make sure that they're yours, and then I also try to evaluate why you want to accomplish them. I think that some people have goals and they set up these milestones they want to reach, sometimes to be accepted or appreciated by other people. But I think ultimately you have to set those things up for yourself. But you also have to learn how to deal with failure and not always hitting the mark. And I've learned the higher that you aim, even if you hit below the mark, you can still leave a pretty high mark. So I always aim high. So that'd be my advice to anybody, and not just in music, just in life, as a parent, as a friend. Nobody's perfect, but aim high.